Welcome inside the War Room. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we're back today for episode 56 of the Dynasty War Room podcast. On today's show, we are going to break down my top 18 running back rankings for the upcoming NFL draft, and I have it broken down into tiers and got some stats and numbers for you on all of these running backs to look forward to in the draft. So before we get into that, as always, make sure you are following this podcast on your platform of choice. We are on everything out there: Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Amazon, you name it, we're there. Go make sure you're following this show so you don't miss any future episodes. And go find us on social media. We're on Twitter or X at Dynasty War Room. You can find me on Blue Sky at Andrew V. Court. And YouTube. Go find us there. Subscribe to the channel. It's at Dynasty War Room. And make sure you hit us with any questions or comments on any of those platforms, and we'll be happy to interact with you and answer your fantasy questions. So let's move on into the running backs. This is the highlight of this draft class. This is a very good running back group, and especially important in a year where the quarterbacks are underwhelming, the wide receivers are underwhelming, and a couple of good tight ends at the top of the class, but the running backs are what is going to drive the success or lack thereof of this rookie class for Dynasty. So I have 18 players broken down into tiers. This is already more players than last year that we talked about. I think last year we had about 15 or 16 running backs on the show at this time last year. And, the bottom 5 to 7 names are really not all that important. And it's a lot different this year because I think that as of right now, I have at least 9 running backs in my top 24, and then my 10th running back is probably my 301 at this point. So it's, 10 guys in the top 25. It's a really good group of running backs. And then all these other players I'm going to touch on, after that top 10 are players that I fully expect to go in the third round of rookie drafts. I think it's going to be a very, very running back heavy as you go through this draft, because there's so many names that are draftable, and they're going to be guys that we don't even talk about on today's show that get picked on day 3, and you're going to scoop some of them up in your 4th rounds and stash those guys on your bench. So lots of good names that we want to get to today. So we'll try to do this efficiently and get through the list. So we're going to start at the top with number 1. Everybody knows it. Ashton Jeanty, running back at Boise State, projected to be a top 10 pick in the draft. A lot of rumblings that he could go to Vegas with the 6th overall pick. He could go any number of spots really in that 6 to 15 type of range, and he's just an awesome player. There's not really a lot to even say other than that his numbers are insane. He's 21.3 years old as of right now here at the very end of March, 5'8", 211 pounds. And last year at Boise State, where he was the runner-up for the Heisman, 374 carries for 2,601 yards, 29 touchdowns on the ground, had an additional 23 receptions for 138 yards and a touchdown. So just incredible numbers. He's shifty, he's elusive, he can break tackles, he's got solid speed. There's really not a lot to nitpick about Ashton Jeanty. I fully expect him to enter the league as the number 3 running back in Dynasty behind Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson, and he should give you a nice long career of production, and so hopefully he goes to a good spot, and it's a great draft to have the 101 as it usually is, and he's the clear-cut player by a mile in this class over every other player regardless of position. At number 2 in these rankings is Omarion Hampton, our North Carolina running back. Projected draft capital right now is the back of the 1st, could fall into the early 2nd. I think that's actually going to be really important for where he goes in rookie drafts. If he goes in the 1st round, he is almost for sure going to be my number 2 player. But if he falls to the 2nd, then I think you can get into this where, is he going to be, 2nd or 3rd at the running back position, depending on where Travion Henderson goes. Where does Ted McMillan, Luther Burden, some of these other receivers, it's going to be a landing spot game at that point if he goes in the second to determine who's the second overall pick in rookie drafts. But he certainly will be in the conversation, and right now is in that spot for me. He's 22 years old, 6 foot, 221 pounds, so really good size-speed combo. He had incredible numbers as well, with 1,660 yards on 281 carries, 15 touchdowns. He also is a very good pass catcher. He had 38 receptions, 373 yards, and 2 more touchdowns. So this is someone that can really handle a full 3-down workload. And that is the reason that I have Hampton at 2 over Henderson, who, spoiler alert, I have at number 3. TreVeyon Henderson is a very explosive, very good player, but Amarian Hampton is explosive in his own right. He had a very good NFL combine. Speed score was very strong. Running a 4.4 40-yard dash at his weight of 221 pounds is just a really great combo. Players like that succeed in the NFL, and he has the body size to be able to withstand the hits that are going to come in the NFL. He can do it through the air with catching the ball. So this is someone that, frankly, should hardly ever have to leave the field. And the only other player that can do it at quite the same level, is Ashton Jeanty, who of course is a 3-down player as well. So you'll notice that I do tend to favor players that I think can stay on the field on all 3 downs when it comes to some of these comparisons as we go down the list of guys that are more, early down players or more receiving backs on 3rd down. I want to shoot for a ceiling play at running back and land the players that I think can be on the field all the time. So Amarian Hampton to me is someone that can and should do that. TreVeyon Henderson, while it's certainly possible that he can do that, I think profiles as somebody that might end up as the 1A in a committee. And I like sort of the safety that someone like Hampton provides. And he has a great ceiling as well. So Amarian Hampton, my number 2 running back right now here at the end of March, beginning of April. At number 3, TreVeyon Henderson. And I mentioned tiers. So the first 3 players are all in their own tier. So Jeanty is in a tier of his own, Hampton's in his own tier, and Henderson is in his own tier. I actually have 9 different tiers for my top 18 at the position, and 5 of those tiers are going to be single-player tiers, 3 of them right here at the top. I just think that's how the class works out, where there's a couple spots where I don't think certain players quite do enough to reach the group ahead of them, but don't belong necessarily grouped in with the players below them. So we'll talk about all of those guys as we get to them, but the first 3 of that list are Jeanty, Hampton, and Henderson, each in their own tier of 1, 2, and 3. Now, Henderson, out of Ohio State, projected 2nd-round draft capital right now. There is a chance he sneaks into the first, which would, of course, be great for Dynasty drafts. I think that would, put him in the conversation of number 2 overall, certainly number 3 overall, if that were to happen, depending on what happens with the wide receivers. And this is regardless of Superflex or a single QB, because I would have first-round running backs ahead of Cam Ward or the other QBs in this draft. We talked about that a bit on last week's show with the quarterbacks, and then the week before with our first edition of our top 24, and how we kind of see the quarterbacks fitting in. But in terms of TreVeyon Henderson, he's 22.4 years old. So he played 4 years at Ohio State, 5'10", 202 pounds. Very productive player. He had some injury concerns throughout his career. 144 carries for 1,016 yards, 10 touchdowns. He also had 27 catches for 284 yards and a touchdown in his final season at Ohio State. So Henderson split a backfield in his final season at OSU with Quinshon Judkins, who you're going to hear about in just a minute. And both of them were great. Both ran for just over 1,000 yards. Both had fairly similar receiving stats, although Henderson did have an additional 120 yards through the air. But still, really productive player. He's explosive. He's got great speed. He's able to get those breakaway runs, those He can take a short pass and take it the distance. So he's someone that I think fits really well in today's modern NFL, where that receiving work is certainly relied upon, and you have to be able to make moves and create space. And he's someone that can do that. He has been sort of a dynasty darling for years for people that play in Devy leagues or, paid attention to recruiting and that sort of thing. And he's had a bit of an up and down career. He had a really strong freshman year at Ohio State. Then he had some issues staying healthy, missed some games here and there, but was able to stay healthy his senior season and, was able to lead that team to a national title. So a lot to like with TreVeyon Henderson. Really good blend of, rushing ability, receiving ability, and speed that'll fit in pretty much any offense throughout the NFL. So it'll be really exciting to see where he goes. Right now, I think the second round, early portion of the second round is a good bet. But there's always the possibility that a team there at the end of the first, a contending team that could add someone, think maybe a Washington or a Kansas City, someone like that could certainly use a player of his skill set. So that's what I'll be hoping for to just further strengthen the top of our rookie drafts. Moving on to player number 4, who's also in tier number 4 with one other player. So this is a 2-player tier, and we'll talk about these guys a bit together because they are extremely close, and you can rank them one way or the other. I think I actually have an opposite of consensus right now. I have Caleb Johnson at number 4, Iowa running back, and at number 5, I have Quinshon Judkins, Ohio State running back. So these two guys, similar players, in my opinion, in terms of kind of their body type and some of their production metrics. But the reason that I have Caleb Johnson ahead of Quinshon Judkins largely comes down to pass catching ability. I think that Caleb Johnson is a better pass catcher. I think that he is going to have a better likelihood of staying on the field as a 3-down back. Now, Quinshon Judkins is an elite runner, very powerful. He's got that short area burst that we were looking for. He had a really good combine, whereas Johnson maybe came in a little bit slower than expected. So Judkins had the better time there and had a better combine. Both players right now projected second-round picks, although Caleb Johnson could slip to the 3rd. And if that does happen, I would expect my rankings to change to reflect that and have Judkins at number 4 and Johnson at 5, maybe 6, depending on what happens with some of these other players. But Caleb Johnson is 21.6 years old. He's 6'1", 224 pounds. Judkins, very similar, also 21 years old, 21.4, 6 foot, 221 pounds. So very similar in size, just a tiny bit smaller for Judkins, but both guys are still bigger bodied backs, power runners that should be able to get goal line work, should be able to handle early downs with no problem. And Caleb Johnson at Iowa was practically their entire offense. And if you know anything about Iowa football, they're not exactly a passing team. So at Iowa, 240 rushing attempts last season, 1,537 yards, 21 touchdowns on the ground. He also had 22 catches for 188 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Quinshon Judkins at Ohio State, fewer carries. He had 194 for 1,060 yards and 14 touchdowns. And he also had 22 catches for 161 yards and 2 scores. So you might hear that or look at that if you've looked it up and you're thinking, well, how can you say that Caleb Johnson is a better pass catcher than Judkins when they have the same exact, receiving stat line essentially from last season? And to me, this comes down to, target share within the offense, the type of offensive system that is being run. Iowa does not throw the ball nearly as often as Ohio State. Caleb Johnson, I think his 22 catches for additional yardage than Judkins is a bit more impressive than Judkins in the Ohio State offense. And it's not to say that Judkins can't catch the ball, because if he couldn't catch the ball at all, he wouldn't be in my top 5. It's simply that I think Johnson is a better pass catcher, is able to more fluidly run routes, and is somebody that I would rely upon more than Quinshon Judkins, who spent a couple years at Ole Miss as well and was extremely productive, burst onto the scene as a freshman in the SEC, was really, really strong numbers, but he was never really a pass catcher there either. So Judkins has more of a history in terms of how good he is on the ground compared to Johnson, who was a more of a build-up over time, whereas Judkins was just burst immediately onto the scene. But Johnson, I think, is going to be able to handle that third down role and catch passes, and I think for fantasy, that's going to make him a slightly better asset to have, assuming he gets the draft capital. Now, because of the, slightly, it's not bad. His 40 time and his NFL Combine performance were not bad. They just were not as good as a lot of these other players. And so while his speed score is still a sufficient number, it's not going to hurt him. It didn't blow us away. I think a lot of people expected just a little bit faster. And so that's going to hurt the perception on Caleb Johnson, which I think actually could make him a value in your drafts. So draft capital, landing spot are going to matter a lot for both of these players. But as of right now, I see them as very similar players as guys that I would be targeting in the back half of round one in a draft. All right. Number 6, Cam Skattebo, running back out of Arizona State. He's in a tier of his own, so he's the 4th of the 5 running backs that's just completely in his own tier. And my number 6 running back, he is 23.1 years old, 5'9", 219 pounds. Recently ran the 40-yard dash at his pro day. A little bit slow, kind of as expected, a 4.65. But this is a player that did everything for his offense this year. 293 carries, 1,700 yards, 21 touchdowns on the ground. He also caught 45 passes for 600 yards and 3 touchdowns. So this is someone that almost, all by himself powered this Arizona State team to the college football playoff, had a really gutsy performance against Texas, and I think caught everyone's attention as, hey, this guy can do everything. He can catch the ball. He's a powerful runner. He fights for extra yards, but he's not an explosive athlete. He's not someone that's going to run by you. He's going to rely more on his toughness, grit, someone that is going to have to, fight for every single yard that he gets. And I think there's going to be a lot of teams that like that and gravitate to that skill set, but he's not the same type of athlete as these other running backs that are ahead of him. His production in college might be better than everybody except for Genty, but Hampton and Henderson and Judkins, Johnson, all these guys are just better physical athletes. And so they're going to have a bit of an easier time transitioning to the NFL. But Skattebo, I think if he can go on day 2, and not fall to day 3, that would be huge for his draft position in Dynasty, because you've got 5 guys that feel like locks for day 1 or day 2 draft capital, and in the 5 players that we've talked about, with really Johnson being the only one that could slip to the 3rd. I think the other players are pretty much locks to go in the 2nd, but Skattebo right now is projected to be a 3rd round pick. He could sneak into the 2nd round. He also could fall to the 4th. I think it just depends how teams view the whole issue with the speed. Do they value the production and the strength and the power over the lack of speed? So we'll see what teams think, but I am impressed. I like Skattebo a lot. I think he's a really good player to target, probably at the very beginning of the 2nd round in rookie drafts, kind of at that 1-2 turn. And he is a little bit older as a prospect, so it's not just the speed that's a knock. He's one of 2 players in my top 18 that are 23 years old or older, the other being RJ Harvey, who we'll get to later on. But, that's a minor concern. And but if he goes to a team where he can step in as a starting running back, of which there are a number of teams that need a guy, then I'll feel really good about him at the top of the 2nd round. All right, starting up the next tier, which has 3 players in it, and at number 7 overall at the position, Bashal Tutin, running back out of Virginia Tech. And he shot up the rankings a bit, or at least caught more people's attention after his very, very strong NFL Combine. He had the fastest 40 time, and that's going to help his draft capital. He's being talked about as a late 3rd, early 4th round pick, and which round he goes in is going to make a huge difference on where he goes in drafts and where he finishes in my rankings. You can say that same thing about probably 4 or 5 other guys in this territory, where if they go in the 3rd round, they're going to be awesome 2nd round rookie picks. If they fall to the 4th, well, then we might be talking back of the 2nd and or early 3rd, and it's just one of those things where it turns into more of a toss-up. So I'm very hopeful that Bashal Tutin and a number of these other players are able to sneak into the 3rd round, because his numbers are really good. 22.1 years old, 5'9", 206 pounds, played 2 years at Virginia Tech after transferring there from a small school. I believe it was Virginia or North Carolina A&T. I think that sounds right off the top of my head. And he, last year as the starter, 183 carries, 1,159 yards, 15 touchdowns. He also caught 23 passes for 82 yards and 2 touchdowns. So he can catch the ball. He's got the elite speed and explosiveness. I wouldn't say that he's necessarily a super well-polished running back. I think there's going to be some stuff to work on. Number one is he's going to have to make sure he holds onto the ball. He had a few fumbles last year, but I don't think it's something to be overly concerned about. It wasn't like he fumbled the ball in every single game or anything crazy like that, but it's just something that could affect where he's drafted. So Tutin, though, we like the speed, we like the size. He's still at a good age, and the underlying metrics are favorable for him as long as he can go in the 3rd round. And but even if he goes in the 4th, I'll still be very much in on Tutin. He just might not be my number 7 running back because, again, that line from the 3rd to 4th round players does have a pretty big impact on how the NFL views these guys. So, the next 3, 4, 5 players, depending on who goes in the 3rd, who goes in the 4th, who falls, that could rearrange these 2 tiers. But the next player in this tier is my number 8 running back, and that's DJ Giddens out of Kansas State. And he's another one projected borderline 3rd, 4th rounder, and 21.6 years old, 6 foot, 212 pounds, and at Kansas State last year, 205 carries for 1,343 yards, 7 touchdowns. Also can catch the ball, had 21 receptions for 258 yards and another touchdown. So DJ Giddens, another one of these running backs that really helped us stock at the Combine, and a really good athlete, just all around explosive. He's fast. He's got that short area quickness that you look for, and he's got the production to back it up. So from a numbers standpoint, he's got everything that I would look for. It's just a matter of, is he going to go on day 2? Does he go to day 3? And that's really, it feels like I'm going to repeat myself for all of these guys, but that's going to be a big, big thing for where we take them in rookie drafts. And the landing spot, does it go somewhere where he is the clear number 1? Is it going to be a fight to just get a backup spot somewhere if he goes in the 4th round and he's backing up some, clear known starter, like if he ends up in Green Bay or Baltimore or something like that. So we'll see where the landing spot is, but I do like from DJ Giddens where the numbers point to for him from a size, speed, athletic combination, and he has the production to back it up. At number 9, and the final player in this 3-man tier is Devin Neal, running back out of Kansas. Projected 4th round pick, could always go on day 2 as well in the 3rd round. But 21.6 years old, 5'11", 213 pounds. He tested a little bit slow at the Combine, but still, as a bigger guy, 213 pounds, he has the size that we're looking for in an NFL running back. And he still had really good production at Kansas. 1,266 yards, 16 touchdowns on 219 carries. He also caught 24 passes for 250 yards and a touchdown. So he can do everything from a rushing and pass catching standpoint. And again, that's where Devin Neal, to me, there's a player or two on this list that might be ahead of him in terms of the consensus right now. But I just see Devin Neal as someone who can be on the field for all three downs, that can be a 3-down running back. And you want a guy in fantasy that's going to get the volume. He's going to be on the field a lot. He's got the size to get the goal line touches, and he can still catch the ball. And that's what Devin Neal is. It's what a lot of these guys can do that I've talked about already. And it's why I'm a little bit wary of a couple of other names on this list, including number 10 on this list, Dylan Sampson. So Dylan Sampson, number 10, he's a running back out of Tennessee, and he's someone that probably based on consensus rankings right now would be a couple spots ahead of Devin Neal and DJ Giddens and even Bashal Tutin, depending on where you look. But projected third-round pick, could go to the fourth. He's 20.5 years old, so he definitely has the youth on his side. But he's a little bit smaller, 5'8", 200 pounds. And he had a really nice year at Tennessee, 258 yards, 1,491 yards on the ground with 22 touchdowns. He also had 20 catches for 143 yards. And Dylan Sampson is someone that, coming out of the Tennessee offense that has been notoriously difficult for evaluation purposes in terms of these prospects over the past few years, obviously has really good numbers on the ground. He's got solid speed, but he's a little bit undersized. He's not as good of a pass catcher as I feel like he should be for his size. And playing in that type of offense, I would have expected some better receiving numbers. And so I don't know that he can be a 3-down back in the NFL. So that's why I have him a couple spots lower than where a lot of other people have him ranked right now, just because I'm not convinced that he can do everything. Now, obviously, the nearly 1,500 rushing yards and 22 touchdowns is great. It shows that he can be a goal line back, even though he is only 5'8", 200 pounds. So he does have some power, in that compact body of his. But I wanted to see some better receiving numbers, and I just didn't quite get there with him, despite being in one of those high-flying offenses in the SEC. So certainly could rise up the ranks if he goes on day 2. But as of right now, I have other players that I prefer to him in this range. And so I don't necessarily anticipate having a ton of Dylan Sampson on my rosters, but somebody that's probably going to be at the 2-3 turn in Superflex rookie mock drafts. And, we'll just see what the landing spot looks like for him. But again, underwhelmed by the receiving and just one of those smaller running backs that I typically am not as interested in having. Next up, and this is a two-man tier. So Sampson and my number 11 running back, Ollie Gordon, are in a tier together, and very different style running backs. Ollie Gordon out of Oklahoma State, projected 4th-round draft capital. He is 21.2 years old, 6'1", 226 pounds. So vastly different size-wise from Dylan Sampson. Much bigger, much heavier, much more of a power running back. And he had 190 carries, 880 yards, 13 touchdowns this past fall. He also had 29 receptions for 179 yards and a touchdown. So Ollie Gordon is someone that had a huge fall off from where he was in 2023. He had over 1,700 rushing yards, was the best running back in college football, and he just fell off a cliff along with practically his entire team in 2024. So it's hard to see, is he going to be the 23 version in the NFL? Is he going to be the 24 version? I'm not sure. He's, a power guy. He's going to be an early down grinder. I don't really see him as somebody that's going to get a lot of passing down work. Not that he can't catch the ball. I just think with his, sort of lack of speed, not that he's slow for his size, because I think he's he's adequate speed given that he's 226 pounds, but there are other players that would be better suited to handle a third down or hurry up offense type of role, 2-minute drill. And Gordon, I think, is somebody that probably is going to have a nice kind of high level backup role to start off his career, where he's the number 2 somewhere, and then when the starter misses some time, he's going to get a lot of volume. So I view him as a volume play, but if he's not going to get the carries that you would need to rack up a nice game on the ground, I don't think he's going to be able to help you out in terms of adding receptions to sort of a lesser number of carries like some of these other guys might be able to do. So, and just the fall off bothers me a bit. Potential off the field concerns. I think he had some legal issues before the season. So, not somebody that I love, but I'm willing to take the shot in the third round of a rookie draft on someone that did have his type of production at Oklahoma State. At number 12, and the fifth and final player that has a tier of his own, is going to be R.J. Harvey, running back out of UCF. And this is someone right now projected 4th-round pick, and all these projected draft capital numbers are from NFL Mock Draft Database. And right now, projected 4th-rounder, he's 24.1 years old. So that's the huge knock on R.J. Harvey, is the age. He's also a little bit undersized, 5'8", 205 pounds, just a little bit bigger than Dylan Sampson, but something that concerns me a little bit. Did have some nice, speed numbers that came out. I believe he ran a 4.4, and he has really good production. He has a lot of it too. This isn't somebody that came on late. He's got just a full career of production, but he came into college, had injuries, and I believe he started college as a quarterback and then switched over to running back. I could be wrong on that, but that's what I thought I have here on R.J. Harvey. But missed time. He played, he's been in college a long time, as evidenced by the fact that he's 24 years old. So just by nature, and we talked about this a lot last year where there was a bunch of older running backs, even if R.J. Harvey comes out and has a great season, he becomes a starting running back, his shelf life for value in Dynasty is already going to be shorter just right off the bat because of the fact that he's 24 years old. So at UCF last year, great numbers. 232 carries. He had 1,577 yards, 22 rushing touchdowns. He also caught 20 passes for a little under 300 yards and 3 more touchdowns. So great production. He can do it on the ground. I think he's a capable 3-down running back, but the age is absolutely a concern because you have to hope that he walks into a situation where he can take over basically on day one. Otherwise, he's just going to be one of those high-level handcuffs where, he can give you a good volume-based game when someone's hurt. And, maybe similar to Ollie Gordon, just he's a lot smaller than Ollie Gordon, but similar in that he's going to need volume and need something to happen in terms of injury or whatnot to a player ahead of him, I think, to latch onto a starting role. And then at 24, you got one contract with R.J. Harvey. This is not a player that's going to be getting a second contract in the NFL, most likely. It's going to be a, 3-4 years of dynasty value if he ends up being a good player. But I'm not sure that I see the upside for Harvey in terms of whether he can be an elite player. But I think he could be, a solid RB2 if he gets a starting role. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I hope it does. He's a nice prospect, and he had really good production. So, nice to see players that play well and have incredible production be rewarded with an opportunity to get a starting role in the NFL. It's just one of those things where it's a really good class, and you might end up a little bit buried and fall to sometime on day 3. All right, now we move on to my final tier of running backs. So we've had a lot of smaller tiers. Now we have the biggest of the group where 13 through 18, 6 players here. and they're all projected day 3 picks. So somewhere between rounds 4 and 7, and most of these guys should go, somewhere probably in the 5th round, maybe 6th. Just kind of depends on how the teams treat the position when they get further down the board, given that there are a number of strong other players at the position. It's one of those risks where, okay, we have so many good players that teams could decide to do one of two things. They could take a bunch of guys early because they want to make sure that they get the guy they really like and they're the best player and all that sort of thing. Or they could go, hey, there's so many good running backs. Why are we spending an early round pick when we can use our 4th, 5th, 6th round pick and get someone that, maybe is of 3rd or 4th round quality to help our roster out. So we'll see how it goes. But to start off this tier of running back, I have Trevor Etienne, brother of Travis Etienne, and he's coming out of Georgia, transferred over there from Florida, projected 5th round pick, and he's 20.7 years old, 5'9", 198 pounds, so definitely on the smaller end. And he is someone that split time in that Georgia backfield. So 122 carries, 609 yards, 9 touchdowns, but he did catch 32 passes for just under 200 yards. So that is the strength for Trevor Etienne, is as a pass-catching running back. He is a solid runner, can certainly do it, doesn't have a lot of wear and tear, but he did have some good, solid production all 3 years in college. So it's not like he came on late. He's somebody that might be better suited for today's NFL as a pass-catching running back, and I think that he could be an intriguing 3rd-round rookie pick. I don't see him going on day 2 of the NFL draft, but he went to Georgia. He's got the recruiting pedigree, obviously the bloodlines with his brother, and a team could decide, hey, this is someone that we want as a complimentary back in the 3rd round. So never say never on one of these players sneaking into day 2, and Etienne could certainly do that. He's also got the youth, the age is on his side, only being 20 years old. So not someone that I see being a 3-down back, not someone that I necessarily see being a 1st or 2nd down grinder or even a goal line back necessarily. Not that he can't do it, but his skill set definitely relies on being a good pass catcher, and so that's what I like out of Etienne. Another player that is most definitely a pass catcher, but had some good production on the ground, is LaQuint Allen, running back out of Syracuse, projected 6th round pick, and he is 20.6 years old, so also a very young player, and 6 foot, 204 pounds, so a little bit bigger than Trevor Etienne. It would be nice if he could put a few extra pounds on, because at being 6 foot, if he could put 5 to 10 pounds on, all of a sudden he goes from someone that might be kind of a pure pass catcher to, hey, this guy could be a 3-down running back. So the ceiling is high for LaQuint Allen. Could certainly bust. He's one of those kind of high risk, high reward types of players, as are most of the guys in this range, where if he can put it all together, could be really good, especially given the fact that he was a stud at catching the ball. So LaQuint Allen, 228 carries, over 1,000 yards rushing, 16 touchdowns at Syracuse, and he also caught 64 passes for 521 yards and 4 touchdowns. So really good rushing numbers, 1,000 yards, 16 touchdowns is great, and but he caught 64 passes and had over 500 yards through the air, which really, really awesome production over there with Kyle McCord at Syracuse. And they had a pretty high-powered offense. So a lot to like from the raw production numbers there. Like I said, he's got the age on his side, so he can. So he does have time to sort of add a little bit of weight, build into his body a little bit more, because he is just 20 years old, one of a few 20-year-old running backs in this class, along with Etienne and Sampson. So I definitely like the upside here, and somebody that I think could be a worthwhile flyer in the third round of rookie drafts, as long as he doesn't, go too late in the draft. I think the fear right now is that he does end up more of a 6th or 7th round pick, but if he ends up in the 4th or 5th, might be a little more worthwhile of a guy to take a shot on in your rookie draft. Next up is going to be a player that is kind of the opposite of the previous two guys, where still kind of one-sided in terms of what he's best at, but instead of being a pass catcher, he's just a pure power rusher. And that's Damian Martinez out of Miami. Projected 4th round pick. I could see him falling a little bit further than that, but could be a situation where he's a better real-life NFL running back than he is for fantasy, because I just don't know that he's going to catch the ball. But he is 21.1 years old, 6 foot, 217 pounds, so definitely has the size. And he had 1,000 yards rushing last year and 10 touchdowns on 159 carries for Miami. So very good rusher, transferred over from Oregon State where he had 2 really good years of production. So this is someone that has been making an impact running the football since he stepped onto the field as a freshman. So that certainly is appealing. It could land him some good draft capital. If he were to somehow sneak into day 3, I think he'd be bumped up my rankings. But the big fear here is he only had 17 catches for 204 yards, and that was his best year receiving-wise. He's just not a pass catcher. So can he do it? I'm not entirely sure because he just doesn't have the numbers to back it up. But if he gets the opportunity, he could turn into something pretty good for fantasy, but I just worry that he's more of a, power back, could get some goal line work, but it's something where maybe you're stuck relying on his touchdowns and not so much of a receiving back. Think like a Jamal Williams when he was on the Lions, had that one huge year with a bunch of touchdowns, but not really a pass catcher. That's kind of what I see for Damian Martinez, where maybe he does have some fantasy value, but it's more hit or miss when he lands on a team that's going to just feed him the rock, especially in the red zone. Next up is number 16, Jarquez Hunter from Auburn, projected 5th round pick, another guy that had some early year production. He had a pretty strong career at Auburn. And he's 22.3 years old, 5'9", 204 pounds, and he had 187 carries for 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns. Also caught 21 passes for 155 yards and a touchdown. So he can do everything. I would like to see a little bit more in terms of the receiving numbers for him, but I think he at least is capable. I just don't know that he's an elite pass catcher, but certainly is someone that could be a good 3rd round sleeper, given the fact that he was able to get on the field as a freshman at Auburn and maintained a role all 3 years where, a lot of players nowadays, it's, you start somewhere and you got to wait and transfer, or, getting on the field isn't necessarily, or staying at the same school is not necessarily something you see all the time anymore. But Hunter did that, got on the field early as a freshman, and 1,200 yards there in his final season, I think is really good production in the SEC. So 5th round draft capital for him is something that I think makes a lot of sense and could end up as a nice complementary piece in the NFL that could give you some value, again, depending on what happens with the situation in front of him. But Jarquez Hunter, number 16 at the running back position for me. Number 17, our second to last player that I'm going to talk about today, Raheem Sanders. I probably have heard his nickname, Rocket Sanders, transferred to South Carolina from Arkansas, and right now projected 6th round pick, and 21.8 years old, 6 foot, 217 pounds. Struggled a bit at South Carolina. Was coming off an injury, though, from his final year at Arkansas. He had 183 carries, 881 yards, and 11 touchdowns. He did catch the ball. He had 27 catches for 316 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Sanders is a really interesting player because he has the size and speed combo that you would look for. He's a big guy at 6 foot 217, and he had a good combine. I mean, this is an explosive player that has speed. And those players that have the power speed combo tend to do very well in the NFL. The problem with Raheem Sanders is I just don't know that he's that good of an actual running back. We didn't really see him do a whole lot despite having that combination of size and speed. Obviously, the injury could have factored into that. He did have a really good sophomore season at Arkansas where he had a really good production line, but I feel like there's something missing with Sanders, whether it's a vision issue or a shiftiness problem. I'm not entirely sure, but he's being projected really late on day 3 for somebody that, with his size and even his production's not bad. You would probably think that he'd be higher up on draft boards, but I think that there's a reason that he's a little bit down the board. So could be a sleeper potential type of player if he lands in a decent spot, but it's one of those things where the traits are nice, but you don't know if he's actually a good player. It kind of reminds me of Donovan Edwards with Michigan, where certainly has the speed and the explosiveness, but the production isn't there. And you just kind of, if you watch him play, you go, oh yeah, he just kind of runs in a straight line and bumps into people. So I don't know if it's the same type of scenario here with Sanders, but he does have some interesting things there that could make him a worthwhile rookie pick, somewhere late in the 3rd round, 4th round of your rookie draft. And while I mentioned him, he's not in my top 18. But Edwards is someone, a popular name. I don't think he's a very good running back. I think he's a wide receiver, frankly. He does have some good receiving metrics. So if you're looking for another, 4th round guy that might be better in the NFL than he was in college, Donovan Edwards could be someone that fits that mold, especially if he's used more as a slot receiver. Because he's a really good athlete. He can catch the ball. I just don't think that he has very good vision. So I wouldn't necessarily want him at running back. But speaking of players that have played wide receiver and running back, let's move on to my number 18 player at the position, and that's Brashard Smith, running back out of SMU, who started his career as a wide receiver at Miami before transferring and transitioning over to running back. So he's projected to be a 5th-round pick, and he's 21.9 years old, 5'10", 194 pounds, so a little bit on the smaller end, especially from a weight standpoint, which does scare me a bit, but he's explosive. He has some speed, which you'd figure being a former wide receiver. He can certainly catch the ball. He had 39 receptions for 327 yards and 4 touchdowns through the air. But he had a pretty nice year from a production standpoint at running back. 235 carries, 1,332 yards, and 14 touchdowns for the SMU Mustangs, who did make the college football playoff. So had a really nice final season in college. And we saw this archetype work last year with Tyrone Tracy, a guy who was a wide receiver, switched over to running back, and has had some success in the NFL. I view Smith pretty similarly in the fact that, probably somebody that you're taking in the 4th round of your rookie drafts. And if you want to bet on the versatility and the fact that he can catch the ball, it's never a bad thing to take a shot on that type of player, given the value that those players can give you in, what most people today play in PPR leagues. So that's some nice, kind of a nice floor to have. And if you can figure things out, maybe bulk up a little bit, another player that could probably add 10 pounds, that would make him a better, give him the better body to succeed in the NFL. But I do like the appeal of those guys that can catch the ball when you're talking about day 3 picks at running back and 4th round dart throws, in your dynasty drafts. So there you have it. That is my top 18 at the running back position. There are certainly other names that we did not get to, some that could even go higher than expected. I did not mention guys like Jaden Blue out of Texas. There's, Khalil Mullings out of Michigan. There's a lot of names. Kyle Monangai from Rutgers is another powerful running back that just can't catch the ball and doesn't have long speed, but can run the ball well. So there's other guys that are going to get drafted, and players that should have an impact in the NFL. Jordan James from Oregon. So Woody Marks is another pass catcher at USC. So again, there's like 30 names that we could talk about, but given the nature of rookie drafts typically being 4 rounds and us wanting to focus on the players that are probably going to have, real fantasy impact in the first year or two, no real need to dive further down the list because I think about, where we get to 18, maybe 20 running backs are probably selected in your rookie drafts, which is going to be essentially, just about half of your drafts as it is. And then you got to throw in, of course, the wide receivers and the quarterbacks, the tight ends. So some decent depth. It's a pretty solid year, I think, to have second-round picks because I think we're going to see a number of running backs that go in that range that ultimately end up being productive players. I think that given the strength at the top of the running back class, you're going to see some wide receivers that will get pushed into the mid and late part of the second round that are worthwhile. So while I don't necessarily think this was the best year to have a top 5 pick, I do think that just having a collection of picks and having a bunch of different shots to land someone special, it's a good year for that. And of course, it's a good year if you need a running back. So there you have it. That's our top 18 at the running back position. We will be back next week where we talk about either rookie wide receivers or rookie tight ends. We'll see what direction we go there, but I know the running backs are kind of the crown jewel of this class, so wanted to get my thoughts out there into the world. So thank you all very much for listening. This is the Dynasty War Room podcast. My name is Andrew Valancourt, and we will talk to you all on the next show.